Hello there, kia ora. Welcome to this week's Omnibus edition. Changing things up ever so slightly with the description of this video to hopefully give you chapter sections. It makes it easier to jump to whichever video you want to go to, and hopefully you want to see them all, but you might not, you might be busy, who knows? You might be the person out there spending $44 million that you won on Lotto last night. Who knows? But you will find a few changes popping up on the YouTube page over the next couple of weeks. You see, they made me a YouTube partner, which is a lot of pressure, and I hope I can handle it. But it means that I can do a few different things around here to zhuzh stuff up, as well as create some exclusive content for YouTube members. There's some interesting stuff going on there, so keep an eye out for it. And if you're looking for other things to keep yourself occupied, this Friday we're going to be launching our new series Behind the Parliament Walls. Blake and I are going to be sitting down and having a chat to politicians and looking into issues and giving you recaps of everything that's been going on during the week, because there's so much that happens every single week at the moment. Think of the show as kind of a mix of Q&A meets Last Week Tonight meets The Daily Show, only not daily, like weekly. So 8 o'clock on Friday nights on here. Feel free to tune in here or on the Facebook page or on Blake's YouTube channel. There's a whole bunch of places that you'll be able to stream it, and it will be available for people afterwards on here and available as a podcast as well. This week we're kicking off with Carmel Sepuloni, the Deputy Leader for the Labour Party, and Shannon Halbert, who is the Labour Party spokesperson for Rainbow Affairs and Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. We've also got Nick Ruane on here, who's part of the Labour team coming up with policies, because the big mission this week was to find out what Labour is up to. What are their plans for the next election? It's really a fascinating thing to sit down and have a watch. So make sure you come and join us for that at 8 o'clock on Friday. And if you're looking for other things to do this weekend, my newsletter, which looks at how weird our right-wing politicians are, that's out and available and linked in my bio. And there's a quiz in the community page. Go and see if you can answer the quiz question and come back tomorrow. There's a poll. Yeah, there's a big poll, I think, there tomorrow about Māori wards and what's the most bullshit excuse you've heard against them, because there's a few of them out there. Look, until next time, make sure you enjoy the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, tell everybody about what's going on, and have a fantastic day. Hello there, kia ora. This weekend was a really quiet one in terms of political news, partly because the mainstream media will happily sit there and live stream National's Smugfest 2024 event, while also ignoring things like Chippy's speech last weekend on the state of the Māori nation, which should have got discussions going around the political tables, but didn't, because they chose to ignore it and not platform it. Yeah, not totally biased media in any shape, way, or form, I guess. I mean, weirdly enough, the New Zealand Herald for some reason is seen by people as left-wing. Yeah, honestly, media literacy is one of those things that we really need to get people more involved in. Anyway, this weekend's Smugfest was essentially just recycled election campaign lines that we've heard before, so we can pretty much ignore those. Oh, and John Key, he got up and started telling the party to cool their heels around race baiting, because it makes their coalition partners look more racist when you leave it to them to be racist in public. And for some reason, the public don't really like the idea of a party leader and prime minister who allows that racism to go on. Can't imagine who they're talking about. The biggest news out of the whole event was the Prime Minister announcing plans to closer monitor students and their maths progress, which doesn't sound like a nanny state thing at all in any shape, way, or form. And while it's easy to sit here wondering if our students should be taking maths advice from, this government, who seem to have issues with numbers all the time, it's just going to garner the responses I've been getting from pretty much every video I've done over the last week about how depressing everything seems to feel at the moment. So instead, I'm going to encourage you to do something different and positive today. Nominations are open now until August 24 for the New Zealander of the Year award. There's a range of categories, and the one I'm kind of hoping that we can get people to focus on is the Local Hero Awards. You see, in addition to their big award winners, they also give out recognitions to a huge number of community heroes all around the motu. Right now, when we hear about frontline services that help communities and people in all sorts of ways having their funding cut by this government, it feels more important than ever that we make sure we recognise and celebrate the people whose mahi makes a real positive difference to the lives of the people that they come in contact with. You can nominate anyone from your community doing good work, so it may be someone you know personally, or someone who's helped you or people you know, or even just someone in your community whose reputation precedes them that you think deserves celebrating. In the description of this video, there's going to be a link to the nomination form, or you can find it just by Googling New Zealander of the Year. If you're on a desktop, it's tiny, but it's up in that right-hand corner. You can find the nomination forms there. Nominations are open until August 24, so let's get out there and celebrate local heroes working through the toughest conditions that we've seen in a really long time to make Aotearoa and its many communities a better place. Hello there, kia ora. I thought today we'd do a little bit of a lesson on media literacy and use this weekend's announcement around National's new maths curriculum overhaul to guide us, because it's actually a really fascinating example of how both spin and bias can combine to show us why this study from Curia Polling Company, the only polling company that consistently puts ACT on 9%, about how far off they are with their results on how people perceive media bias. This weekend, National announced to a very chilled audience, literally, there was no heating in the big hall, that they were going to be overhauling our maths systems in schools. The curriculum would be changing. According to the Prime Minister, our kids are failing maths at an alarming rate, and that could jeopardize their future and limit their career to, being Christopher Luxon's Minister of Finance. And despite reducing funding for every secondary student by about 3% before adjusting for inflation in the last budget, he's determined to get our students achieving. Our media ran this announcement breathlessly. All of the mainstream media outlets used the figures that he provided in his speech without any pushback. And there's actually kind of a good reason for that. They don't have the report he was talking about because it wasn't released until yesterday. So they can't fact check in real time. But the Prime Minister had the report and based his speech and decision to rush changes to the maths curriculum based on that. They made the announcement before media had a chance to dig deeper, and New Zealand media outlets live streamed the speech across platforms and across their outlets completely unchecked. Which means by the time the report itself comes out, the government and the media had already told the country our maths curriculum was just like the $250 a week tax cuts that were promised. It didn't add up. So what was omitted by choice by the Prime Minister was that the numbers are based on test cases for the new curriculum that's due to come in, which sets higher standards than the current one and covered areas not currently covered under the curriculum. That the report actually found students are pretty consistent with their levels of math skills from over the past few years and are not actually dropping in achievement. They were measured against a new bar, a bar that they hadn't been taught for yet. It's like learning about Henry VIII in history and then be tested on the Japanese Empire and World War II. But the amount of pushback and corrections from the media afterwards is significant here to highlight the bias. Data by omission is a way of measuring a bias, and National, again, not giving all the data points and being quoted verbatim shows a right-leaning bias in our media. It's a choice not to push back substantially against these claims or even question the data itself as to whether or not it's accurate, which feeds into the narrative that our students are not achieving and plays into claims that this is all the fault of the last government, both of which are not true. In fact, that same report points out that there is a strong correlation between outcomes and socio-economic factors, and when barriers are lowered, like providing nutritious free lunches, extra support for people with different learning techniques, the use of tools like phones to be able to access better resources directly, and schools given more resources to work with, well, those are all changes that the government's fiddled around the edges with, but the outcomes are far more consistent across age groups and achievement is higher, which also has not been covered by the media, continuing to back up that National Party narrative, which feeds into a right-leaning media bias by using more fear-based headlines and advocating for a more conservative, traditionalist perspective that maths in school should be taught the same way and we should test all the time, despite evidence that this antiquated method doesn't take on board different learning styles and educational needs. So the National Party, once again, fudges numbers, tries to create a panic that they blame on their predecessors, which only they can fix, and doesn't get called out on it substantively until their spin has already caused damage in the national conversation. Hey, definitely helps get those clicks and to sell newspapers. Hello there, kia ora. Like many right-wing governments around the world, ours is following a path where they focus educational outcomes on what they consider a traditionalist view of learning, where every topic is in isolation, and that there's got to be a focus on certain core topics like reading, writing, and maths. We saw this past weekend that they'll even go to scaremongering levels to achieve this at an accelerated pace. But in a follow up interview yesterday, the Prime Minister added to this by telling national Uber fanboy Mike Hosking that he'd happily see schools drop arts and music classes to let schools focus on these areas that he considers the core of learning. And like everything else this government does, it's an idea totally in a vacuum that ignores the realities of the real world. It minimizes the way that young people learn, the outcomes from the way they learn, and the long term implications it can have. Let's take music as an example. As a creative form, music is heavily reliant on maths, beats, timing, chords, all of it's based on numerical interpretations. Research has shown that teaching students music can actually help improve their maths performance by creating neural pathways that better connect their brain. This allows them to be able to interpret complex math issues when they occur by creating alternate synapse connections to see problems and solutions in different ways. In fact, teaching any kind of creative output in school has similar effects across these neural pathways, creating new ways for students to learn and approach problems in other educational areas. Research has found that a comprehensive study in art and creativity alongside more traditional topics will help students increase their comprehension across all academic studies. On top of that, though, there's a number of other benefits. Of course, critical thinking is a topic that this government, especially its more fringe elements, may be keen on not seeing improve amongst the population, or they'd realise just how bad things really are. But by looking at artwork, drama, and different forms of expression, research shows this helps young people build critical learning skills. Those different forms of expression are also a really important tool in creating emotional intelligence in a student population. And with those fringe elements I mentioned before, wanting to remove critical tools in this area like RSE, which is going to put our young people in danger, this is a vital skill for them to have, along with how creativity helps create a sense of identity and self-esteem in students. Hell, it even helps young people hone communication and fine motor skills. It helps with problem solving and spatial awareness reasoning. In older students, it helps promote innovation and approaches to thinking. And research has also shown creative endeavours in schools is an amazing way to help encourage cultural preservation. In India, for example, it helps teach students about their own heritage, traditions, and helps create a sense of national pride and unity. All things this government seems determined to undermine in other ways when it comes to the indigenous culture here. But hey, it's not forcing our young people to be tied to a desk learning numbers and letters by rote in a void outside of the modern way that technology, ideologies, and perspectives have created the world they live in. So, of course, anything creative is going to be stifled in public schools, which ends up just being another advertisement for charter schools to go and make money off the public education system. Hello there, kia ora. This week, we got another example of how the current government seems to be going out of its way to get rid of Te Reo Māori when it was discovered that Paul, oh my god, this man is our treaty negotiations minister, Goldsmith had ordered the removal of Te Reo Māori from invites to the official Matariki celebrations. Now, Māori have felt like they're under constant attack by this current government with legislation changes that directly impact their Te Tiriti given protections of self-determination, as well as the really public minimisation of the language. There are people who flood socials with their thinly veiled racist reckons that it's all about having these things not stuffed down our throats anymore. But there are some serious impacts that these changes have. And we know that from looking at examples from all over the world of what happens when progress towards Indigenous and racial equity gets rolled back. In the United States, for example, affirmative action policies that were designed to improve access to education for Black and Latino communities got rolled back in the past. Things like California's Prop 209 in 1996, which stopped universities taking this on board as an admission tool. As a result, California saw a massive drop in Black and Latino student enrollments. The University of California says it saw a 3% decrease in early career minority enrollments, which equates to thousands of students. And that saw applicant salary earning ability completely plummet. It found that this one decision had a disproportionate exacerbation effect on socioeconomic outcomes, widening the inequitable outcomes that policy had initially strived to close. In Aussie, in 2007, there was the Northern Territory National Emergency Response, also known as the intervention, which saw the federal government taking control of Indigenous communities and changing welfare policies and reducing funding for those communities with tighter regulations on spending for those in the community receiving government assistance. This not only fueled distrust of the government from Indigenous communities, but a 2017 study from Darwin's Menzies School of Health Research and Sydney University found the most impacted here were kids, where school attendance levels completely plummeted and birth rates of newborns dropped. In Canada, there's been numerous attempts from governments to reinterpret Indigenous treaties, often around the use of land and natural resource rights. This has led to a lot of court cases, but also seen as a significant undermining of trust and a driver for tension between successive governments and those impacted communities. It exacerbates socioeconomic disparities and slows efforts for reconciliation. And here, in the early 90s, the national government stripped funding for language and cultural programs and reduced the scope of the Waitangi Tribunal. Those policies actually allowed for the formation of Māori health authorities, but the introduction of user pay models in the health system, social welfare policies of the time, and neoliberal economic policies which saw organisations like unions severely weakened, meant inequities in health outcomes between Māori and non-Māori were exacerbated. The research is really clear. When any government does what our government is currently doing, the outcomes are never what they promise, everyone being equal. It shows these actions polarize public opinion. It sees an increase in the visibility of racism and discrimination. It empowers racists by emboldening their actions. It galvanizes people. It erodes trust in the government. It makes us look really bad internationally. It costs the country more in legal and constitutional debates, and has a disproportionately negative effect on Indigenous communities. So when people try and justify Goldsmith removing just a few words in Te Reo Māori from an invite, well, remember, it's actually part of a bigger picture that all seems to lead to outcomes which harm Māori, and therefore harm all of us. Hello there, kia ora. Yesterday, TV viewers woke up to an interview with Children's Minister Karen Chow defending the decisions to put children at risk by slashing budgets and removing proven effective policies and legislation to save money and pay for tax cuts. In that interview, she claimed that service providers for children and young people were cash cows, hoarding money, so they needed to streamline the whole organisation, claiming that services won't be impacted but streamlined and made more efficient. When asked for evidence, she pulled out that old right-wing politician trick of deflecting with anecdotal, impossible-to-prove stories and "I think it was, but I'm not sure" comments. But the truth of the situation is actually really different, surprisingly. The claims of cash being hoarded is actually an operational contingency. Firstly, these organisations often receive funding from multiple sources, not just the government department. And when it comes to funding types, well, there's actually multiple tiers depending on the government organisation and the service provided, and they're all different. Tier 1 is a support service purchased by the ministry. Tier 2 is a service provided for a specific requirement funded by the ministry. Tier 1 services are usually built with resilience reserves to ensure that they can afford to do the job in the time frame specified. So if it's a 12-month contract, in theory, they should have a year's worth of operational reserves. And those reserves are the thing that could have multiple funding sources. Chow implied that those reserves are all government funded, but that's not usually the case. And every contract with a government department requires an accountability report to show how money was spent. And money that isn't spent is returned. It's not like that time that your mum sent you down to get milk from the dairy and told you could keep the change. It's written into the contracts and agreements that unspent money gets returned. So the cash reserves she claims are sitting there have very specific reasons for doing so. And for community service providers, more funding clearly helps them help more people, which is why some of those reserves are made up of funds from other sources, not just the government. But she also claimed that no money was being taken away from Oranga Tamariki. Services and organisations were being told that they're going to focus on core services from now on. The funds are just being redistributed where it's needed the most. So those budget cuts demanded by the government to pay for its tax cuts, which saw a reduction of 447 roles, including 21 specialist Māori roles, International Child Protection Team, the Leadership Team, Residences and Community Homes Team, Tamaki and Whānau Services, the Legal Division and Criminal Records Teams, and the disestablishment of the Safety of Children and Care Team, was meant to save nearly $60 million, with a budget reduction in this year's budget of $30 million on top. And somehow, they're all still meant to keep funding the level of services currently on offer. Oranga Tamariki have paid for 1,470 services from 451 service providers this year, after reducing the list of service providers by 190 who provided 337 services and reducing funding to another 142 providers. They say that this has saved them $22 million through recouped underutilization costs, which the sector is calling bullshit on, an oversimplification of the enormous complexities of the challenges that they face. Take, for example, the North Shore Women's Centre. Each year, they help between 450 and 500 women with low-cost counselling, social work, and legal advice, as well as help finding services in times of crisis, especially for women who are impacted by family violence, which also clearly impacts children in the household, which is why they get funding from Oranga Tamariki. Until last week. This funding being stopped means a service helping people for 37 years will have to close. The Northcote MP, National's Dan Bidwar, responded by saying, "Yep, it's true. I've asked for more details and we'll look at options when they tell me why, and not, holy shit, let me move heaven and earth to help this clearly valuable local organisation who helps people who really need it." The impact this government is having on our communities is only just starting. We're less than a year into a term being driven by willful ignorance towards the harm their decisions are making towards vulnerable communities all over the motu. But hey, they saved a small percentage of money they're putting aside for the tobacco industry and tax cuts. So I guess it was totally worth it.
Hello there, Blake here. We have a huge announcement on new content coming to the channel and the future of the channel coming up right now.
Hello there, kia ora. Every damn week, it feels like there's so much crap happening that it's impossible to keep up with it, and kind of impossible to get details. This week, for example, we saw MSD starting to make the moves to make more people homeless with crackdowns on emergency housing. The increase in visa fees for applicants from the Pacific Islands, where we get most of our seasonal workers from, the government ruling out any more funding for the Christchurch Cathedral rebuild, proposed 16% of jobs being cut from the Environmental Protection Agency, which is actually one of the agencies that they've been touting as being a safety measure for the fast-track processes that they want to use. They're reducing its ability to do its job. It was also revealed that that same agency wasn't even asked to discuss budget options with the government before this year's budget came out. We saw massive price increases in wholesale electricity. In a cost of living crisis, we saw major concerns raised about the new maths curriculum, like how teachers are being given 6 months to get their head around this, not the 2 years that have been recommended by industry experts or even the countries where it's been implemented in other places. And the fact that they keep gaslighting people over the success of our young people when their data is driven by a 0.38% sample size from students who weren't given the tools to succeed in that test. There was the dropping of the last of the Royal Commission recommendations in the wake of the March 15 terrorist attack, and the Taxpayer Union running paid ads against one of those recommendations about monitoring violent rhetoric. But nothing from them about Chris Bishop going over to France for the Olympics. But they did complain, if little while ago when Grant Robertson went over to the Rugby World Cup final. There was paid advertising as well, mimicking news on the front page of the Herald, again stirring up blatant racist bullshit with disinformation from Hobson's Pledge. You know, that same Hobson's Pledge that New Zealand First MP Casey Costello is a board member of. There was the Ngāpuhi protest against the repeal of Section 7AA, the quiet announcement of the government agreeing to expand weapon-making defence systems in the region for the US, ACT refusing to take complaints about the culture of Parliament to the Parliamentary Commissioner after going to media to make noise about it. There was the new Health Commissioner telling Tova O'Brien off for asking questions. But if Tova was to, God forbid, get sick and end up in a hospital, she would still be one of the 14 layers of management mush that the Ministry of Health told us about, because they said patients were one of those 14 layers. There's been a whole bunch of ass-kissing in mostly the Herald, where they keep telling us that John Key is amazing and is supporting the Nats, and that, you know, people are starting to really learn to love Christopher Luxon, and that Chippy is being mean, and that Kiwi Bank should maybe be sold off. There was the Maritime Union calling out the Finance Minister for short-sighted and expensive blunders around the new ferry systems. And it was revealed a National Party candidate was named in a court case for domestic violence against his own mother. It was also revealed that back in June, the government quietly changed the gun club rules so that clubs don't have to put as much information into their reports to the Firearms Safety Authority, and that the Australian minister who received an all-English invite to Matariki celebrations actually understands some Te Reo Māori, and he learnt that from Split Ends songs, which, interesting side note for you, the Finn brothers who founded Split Ends used to hate regimented school systems and would sneak off to practice in one of the local garages during school time. You know, getting that arts and culture stuff done that this government's also said that they want to sort of minimise so they can focus on reading, writing and maths in the regimented way that led us to seeing the music of the Finn brothers being set up. Oh, and then it was also revealed that Sue Gray, leader of the Outdoors and Freedom Party, had been fined $2,000 this week for her disruptive behaviour in court in 2022 that saw her put into custody. And all of that is just this week. So Blake and I figured now's a really good time to look at some more deep dive content on a more regular basis. From this Friday, each week at 8 p.m, you can join us for a current affairs show that's streamed online through YouTube and Facebook that we're calling Behind the Parliament Walls. Each week we'll talk to politicians and experts on what's happening and try to get more in-depth views and data out there for everyone. On Friday, we'll be joined by Labour Deputy Leader Carmel Sepuloni and Labour's spokesperson for Auckland and Rainbow Issues, Shannon Halbert, as well as disability advocate and policy guide Nick Ruane, to look at the issues like repealing Māori wards, Winston's anti-trans tweets, combating government gaslighting, and what the Labour Party are doing behind the scenes to prepare for the next election. So you can find the links for all of that in my bio. Join us live 8 p.m. on Fridays to try and keep ahead of everything that's going on in the news cycle and deal with some of the crazy in the world that we've got to live with at the moment. Hey, thanks for checking out the video. I mean, statistically speaking, you probably didn't, and I'm just talking to thin air, looking at the trend lines. Not many people get this far, but if you did, congratulations. I'm very proud of you, and I don't even know if I could do that myself, and I made it all. It's complicated. So yeah, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, tell everybody about what's going on, and again, don't forget to tune in to us on Friday. Come and check out the first episode of Behind the Parliament Walls. It's going to be absolutely fascinating to see, well, what Labour's up to really, and their views on a whole bunch of issues. So yeah, until next time, have a fantastic week. I will catch you guys all later.